for wanting to forgive. After my wife announced, she slept with my boss. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped tightly, fingers digging into his palms as if he were trying to anchor himself to reality. Across from him, Emily's face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. She opened her mouth, then closed it, words failing her once more. The air between them was heavy, suffocating. I didn't mean for it to happen, she finally whispered, her voice cracking. It was just once. It was a mistake. Daniel's chest tightened, a crushing pressure that threatened to break him apart. Just once. A mistake. The words echoed in his mind, hollow and mocking. She was talking about his boss, Michael Collins, the man who'd taken him under his wing, guided his career, and shared countless late-night drinks discussing promotions and opportunities. A man he respected, trusted, admired. How long? Daniel's voice was a strained rasp, his throat dry. Emily looked down, her fingers trembling as they clutched the edge of her chair. 3 weeks ago, after the office party, I was drunk. We both were drunk, Daniel repeated, his lips curling into a bitter smile. And that makes it okay? No. God, no. I hate myself for it. I never meant to hurt you, she choked, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was scared. Scared of losing you. Daniel's jaw clenched, his vision blurring with hot tears. He turned away, his gaze landing on the framed photo on the wall, the two of them laughing on their wedding day, faces aglow with love and promise. A perfect moment, now tainted by betrayal. Days passed in a haze. Daniel went through the motions, eating without tasting, speaking without feeling. At work, he could barely look at Michael, his blood boiling every time the man's voice reached his ears. Michael's casual smiles, his confident stride. Did he feel no guilt, no remorse? The anger was all-consuming, and yet, beneath it lay something more agonizing, longing. Daniel missed Emily. He missed the way she'd curl up next to him during movie nights, the way her laughter could fill a room with warmth. He missed the life they had built together, the decision. Clawed at him, a relentless torment. Could he forgive her? Should he? His friends were divided. Tom, his childhood buddy, was furious. You can't let her get away with this, man. She betrayed you. She slept with your boss, for Christ's sake. But then, there was Jared, who had been through his own marital troubles. People make mistakes, Dan. Sometimes good people do terrible things. If she's truly sorry, if she wants to fix this, maybe it's worth fighting for. The dilemma weighed heavily on him, his heart torn between love and pain. One evening, he found himself outside Michael's office, his fists clenched. He was ready for a confrontation, ready to demand answers, to let his anger explode. But when he pushed, the door opened, what he saw stopped him cold. Michael was slumped over his desk, his shoulders shaking. The man looked up, eyes red and swollen, a haunted expression on his face. I figured you'd come sooner or later. Daniel's anger flared. You ruined my marriage, he spat, his voice trembling. Michael's face crumpled. I know I did, and I hate myself for it. He stood up, his movements sluggish, weighed down by guilt. I love my wife, Dan. I betrayed her, just like I betrayed you. It was one stupid, drunken night, and I destroyed everything. I'm losing my family because of this. The raw agony in Michael's voice shook Daniel. He had never seen his boss like this, broken, vulnerable. For a moment, the anger wavered, replaced by a sickening sense of pity. I don't expect you to forgive me, Michael continued, his voice hoarse. I needed you to know that I'm paying for it too. Every damn day. Daniel left. Without another word, his mind reeling. The encounter unsettled him, his anger now tainted with confusion. That night, Emily showed up at his apartment. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen. "I miss you," she whispered, her voice fragile. "I miss us." He looked at her. The woman he'd loved for so many years. The woman who'd shattered him. His chest ached, a tangled mess of pain, anger, and longing. "How do I trust you again?" he asked, his voice cracking. "How do I look at you and not see him?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just, please don't walk away from us." The desperation in her voice cut deep. She was willing to fight for their marriage. But was he? Weeks turned into months. They went to therapy, facing painful truths and confronting ugly emotions. Daniel's anger resurfaced again and again, but so did his love. There were days when he wanted to scream, to walk away and never look back. But then there were moments, small, for wanting to forgive. After my wife announced she slept with my boss, Part 2. Leaving Michael's office felt like shedding a second skin, one that had clung to Daniel with suffocating tightness. The air outside was sharp, tinged with winter's chill. He inhaled deeply, letting the cold fill his lungs, grounding him. This was the first step. He didn't know what lay ahead, but at least he was moving forward. That evening, Daniel came home to find Emily waiting by the window, her fingers nervously twisting her wedding ring. When she saw him, her shoulders tensed, her eyes searching his face for answers. "I quit," he said, his voice firm. "I can't work for him. Not after everything." Emily's eyes widened, guilt and sorrow shadowing her face. I understand. I didn't expect you to. Thank you for trying." Daniel looked at her, the woman who had been his everything, his partner, his best friend. The betrayal still stung, an ever-present ache, but her remorse was undeniable. She was fighting for them, for him, and maybe that was worth something. "I start at a new firm next month. It'll be a pay cut, but we'll manage," he continued, his voice calm. I needed a fresh start." Emily nodded, relief softening her features. "Whatever it takes. I'll find ways to save. I want to do my part." For a moment, Daniel just looked at her, seeing not only the woman who had hurt him, but also the woman who was trying to rebuild what she had broken. It was a bitter, complicated truth, one he was still struggling to accept. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, they navigated the minefield of their fractured marriage. Therapy sessions were raw, brutal. Daniel confronted his pain, his anger, his shattered trust. Emily faced her guilt, her shame, her fears of losing him. Some nights they talked for hours, voices hoarse from crying, from shouting, from pleading. Other nights they sat in silence, a chasm of hurt lying between them. Yet they stayed, they fought, and slowly, imperceptibly, cracks of light began to seep through the darkness. But healing was not a straight line. It was jagged, unpredictable. Some days Daniel could look at her and feel hope. Other days he could barely stand the sight of her, the image of her with Michael flashing through his mind like a cruel, relentless specter. "I hate this," he confessed one night, his voice hollow. "I hate how much power this has over me, over us. I hate feeling weak." Emily reached out, hesitated, then placed her hand over his. Her touch was tentative, gentle. "You're not weak, Dan. You're stronger than I deserve." He looked at her, pain etched in every line of his face. "Then why doesn't it feel that way?" her eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. Because I broke you, and I don't know how to fix it. But I'll spend my life trying. If you let me. Months passed, and life began to take on a new rhythm. The new job was challenging but freeing, untainted by betrayal. At home, they were rebuilding, brick by painstaking brick. Emily was more open, more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. She poured herself into their marriage, showing up in ways she never had before. But the wounds were still raw, and forgiveness was an elusive, slippery thing. One evening, Daniel received a text from Michael. "Can we meet? Just once. I need to apologize. Face to face." His hands shook as he read the message, his stomach knotting. He wanted to delete it, to bury everything connected to that man. But a voice inside urged him to confront it, to find closure. After a sleepless night, he agreed to meet Michael at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Michael looked haggard, his once confident demeanor shattered. As Daniel sat across from him, he noticed the dark circles under his former boss's eyes, the way his hands trembled around his coffee cup. "Thank you for meeting me," Michael said, his voice strained. I don't deserve it, but I needed to say this in person." Daniel's jaw tightened, the anger bubbling beneath his skin. "Say what? That you're sorry? That you regret it? Do you even know what you ruined?" Michael's face crumpled, his shoulders sagging. "I ruined everything. My wife left me, took the kids. I see them on weekends, and they look at me like I'm a stranger. I destroyed my family. And yours. I'll never forgive myself for that." For a moment, Daniel was silent, his chest heavy. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, rehearsing all the things he wanted to say, the pain he wanted to inflict. But looking at Michael now, a broken man haunted by his choices, the words died on his lips. "I loved her," Michael continued, his voice cracking. "I loved my wife, and I betrayed her. I betrayed you. I lost everything, Dan. Everything." Daniel felt a wave of nausea, his emotions swirling in a chaotic storm. Anger, pity, grief. It was overwhelming. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping. Against the floor. "You were my friend," he said, his voice shaking, "for wanting to forgive." After my wife announced she slept with my boss, Part 3, spring arrived with the scent of blooming flowers and a whisper of renewal. The world was moving forward, and Daniel tried to follow its rhythm. Yet despite his resolve, forgiveness remained elusive, slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. His days were a delicate balancing act. He navigated his new job with cautious optimism, grateful for the distraction and the sense of purpose it gave him. At home, he and Emily rebuilt the fragments of their marriage, one fragile piece at a time. They fell into a routine of shared dinners, long walks, and late-night talks. Emily no longer shielded her emotions. She confessed her fears, her regrets, her shame. She didn't hide from his questions, even when they were laced with pain. "How did it start?" Daniel asked. One evening, his voice low but steady. They sat on the porch, the sun setting in shades of gold and pink. Emily looked down, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. "After that fight we had last year, when I felt distant, I started staying late at work to avoid coming home." Michael noticed. He asked if I was okay. "It felt nice to be seen." Her voice cracked. "I was weak. I let my loneliness justify something unforgivable." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting her continue. "It was never about love," she whispered. "It was about feeling wanted. But it was wrong. I knew it even then. I hated myself for it." Daniel exhaled slowly, his heart heavy. Her words hurt, but they also gave him clarity. It wasn't about him being inadequate. It was about her brokenness, her flaws. It was about choices, bad, destructive choices. But why him? He asked, his voice trembling. Why, my boss? My friend? Tears filled her eyes, her face etched with remorse. I wish I knew. Maybe because he was familiar, safe, because he knew you, and in some twisted way, it felt less scary than a stranger. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Daniel closed his eyes, the pain washing over him like a tidal wave. Do you regret it? With everything I am, she sobbed. I'd give anything to take it back, to undo the hurt I caused. They sat in silence, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Forgiveness still seemed far away, but understanding crept closer. The first anniversary of Emily's confession approached like a storm on the horizon, bringing with it a swirl of emotions. Daniel found himself dreading the date, the memories it stirred. On the night before, Emily handed him a small envelope, her hands trembling. I wrote you a letter. I wanted to put it all out there. Everything I felt, everything I did. I want to be honest, even if it hurts. Daniel stared at the envelope, his heart pounding. Why now? She swallowed, tears shimmering in her eyes. Because you deserve the truth, and because I want to be better. I want to be worthy of your forgiveness, if you can ever find it. He took the letter, his fingers brushing against hers. I don't know if I can, he admitted, his voice raw. But I'm still here. I'm still trying. Emily nodded, her face crumpling as she fought back tears. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. That night, Daniel sat alone in his office, the letter heavy in his hands. His heart raced as he unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning her handwriting, delicate and familiar. Dear Daniel, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve your presence in my life. But I want to be honest, even if it shatters what little we have left. You've always been brave, and now it's my turn. I was weak. I was selfish. I chose the worst way to fill the emptiness inside me. It wasn't your fault. It was never about you. It was about me feeling lost, insecure, broken. And instead of facing it, I ran to the nearest escape. I betrayed you with Michael. It started with late nights, conversations that felt safe. But they weren't. They were dangerous because they blurred the lines, made me feel things I should have only felt with you. The first time, it was a mistake. I wanted to stop, but I didn't. I let it happen again. I was caught in a spiral of guilt and addiction to the attention. But it wasn't love. It was poison, and it destroyed everything that mattered. I hated myself every second. I hated the lies, the secrets, the way I hurt you without you even knowing. And when you found out, I wanted to die. Not because I got caught, but because I saw the pain in your eyes, pain that I caused. I miss us. I miss who we were before I ruined it all. I miss your laughter, your kindness, your trust. I don't know if I'll ever be able to earn that back, but I'll spend my life trying. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Even when I was doing the unforgivable, my heart was yours. But I was weak, and I failed you. I'm so sorry, Daniel, for everything. If you can't forgive me, I understand. If you can't love me anymore, I'll accept that. But if there's even a sliver of hope, I'll fight for it. For wanting to forgive. After my wife announced she slept with my boss. Part 4. The days grew longer, and the air turned warmer. Spring blossomed into summer, bringing light and life to the world outside. But inside their home, Daniel and Emily continued to navigate the shadows of the past, stumbling through the labyrinth of pain and healing. Reading Emily's letter had shaken Daniel to his core. Her raw honesty had exposed her vulnerability, her guilt, and her love. But it also reignited his anger, his hurt, his distrust. He found himself spiraling between wanting to hold her and wanting to scream. Forgiveness was supposed to be a bridge, but right now it felt like an insurmountable wall. They began seeing a marriage counselor, Dr. Miriam Patel, a calm, patient woman whose gentle voice coaxed them into confronting their truths. Her office was painted in soothing shades of blue, the chairs plush and inviting. Yet, Daniel often felt exposed, as if the walls were watching, waiting for him to shatter. 1. Session. Dr. Patel leaned forward, her eyes kind but probing. Emily, you've shared your reasons. You've taken responsibility. But there's a question lingering that Daniel hasn't asked yet. Daniel, what do you need to know to move forward? Daniel stared at his hands, his fingers twisting nervously. The question weighed heavily on him, a burden he wasn't sure he wanted to carry, but he couldn't run from it any longer. He looked at Emily, her face pale, her eyes wide with anxiety. Why did you hide it for so long? His voice was rough, each word scraping his throat. Even after you ended it. Why didn't you tell me? Emily's shoulders slumped, her gaze dropping to the floor. I was ashamed. I wanted to pretend it never happened. I thought if I buried it deep enough, it would disappear. Her voice wavered. But it didn't. It festered. And every day I looked at you and felt like a fraud. I was terrified. You'd leave me. That you'd hate me. Daniel's jaw clenched. You were protecting yourself, not me, not us. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. I know I was selfish, and I paid for it every day. I was trapped in my own prison of lies. But that's no excuse. I should have told you. I should have been braver. The room fell silent, the air heavy with emotion. Daniel closed his eyes, his chest tightening. Her words made sense, but they didn't make it easier. Dr. Patel broke the silence. Daniel, you don't have to forgive her today. Healing is a journey. But if you want to move forward, you need to decide. Do you want to keep fighting for this marriage? His heart thudded painfully. He looked at Emily, her face etched with remorse, her body trembling. Despite everything, he still loved her. The love was tangled with pain, but it was there. I don't know how to forgive you yet, he admitted, his voice cracking. But I'm still here, and that has to mean something. Emily's face crumpled with relief, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll fight for us. For you. Months passed, marked by slow progress and painful setbacks. They rebuilt their marriage with cautious steps, brick by brick. But the shadows of betrayal loomed, lurking in the corners, waiting to resurface. Then came the company retreat. It was mandatory, a 3-day conference organized by his new employer, meant to foster team spirit and strategic planning. The location was a luxurious resort by the lake, its serene beauty marred by the fear that gripped Daniel's chest. Because Michael would be there. He hadn't seen his former boss since that fateful confrontation. Michael had vanished from his life. But his presence lingered like a ghost, haunting Daniel's thoughts. Seeing him again was inevitable, but that didn't make it easier. On the first day of the retreat, Daniel walked into the conference room, his shoulders tense, his heart racing, and there he was. Michael stood by the window, talking to a group of colleagues, his demeanor confident, his laughter echoing through the room. He looked unchanged, as if the world hadn't collapsed around them. Rage surged through Daniel, hot and blinding. His fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to confront him, to demand answers, to throw him through the glass window. But he forced himself to breathe, to stay calm. Their eyes met across the room. Michael's expression faltered, his face paling. He looked away, his posture stiffening. Guilt. Good. During the break, Michael approached him, his voice low, hesitant. "Daniel, can we talk?" Daniel's jaw tightened, his muscles taut. "Why? So you can feed me more lies?" Michael flinched, his face etched with regret. "I was wrong. I betrayed you. I crossed a line I can never undo. But I want you to know, it was never about hurting you." Daniel's eyes narrowed, his anger flaring. "You were my friend. You were supposed to have my back. Instead, you stabbed me in it." Michael swallowed, his gaze dropping. Summer waned, and autumn arrived with golden leaves and crisp air. Daniel continued his journey toward healing, the days blending into weeks, each one a mixture of pain and progress. He and Emily rebuilt their life in fragments. They had dinners together, exchanged small smiles, even laughed sometimes. But their conversations remained guarded, the ghosts of betrayal lingering in every room. One Saturday afternoon, they visited the park where they used to picnic before. Everything fell apart. The air was cool, the sun warm against their skin. They sat on the faded blanket watching children play, the echoes of their laughter filling the air. Emily hugged her knees, her voice soft. "Do you remember when we used to come here every Sunday? You always brought that terrible potato salad, and I pretended to love it." A smile tugged at Daniel's lips, unbidden. "You loved my potato salad." She laughed, the sound bittersweet. "I loved you. That's why I ate it." Her eyes turned distant, her smile fading. I wish I could go back to those days, before I ruined everything." Daniel's heart twisted, his fingers digging into the blanket. "You can't change the past." His voice was firm but not cold. "But we're here now. That has to mean something." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "It means everything." They sat in silence, the distance between them shrinking, even if just by an inch. A week later, Daniel received a call from Human Resources. "We've received a complaint about Michael Carmichael. There's an investigation underway, and we need to speak with you." His heart thudded. He thought he was done with Michael, that he'd buried that chapter. But the past refused to stay buried. The meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room. The HR director, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipped tone, explained the situation. "Multiple employees have come forward accusing Mr. Carmichael of inappropriate conduct and abuse of power. We need to understand the nature of your relationship with him." Daniel's mouth went dry. "He was my boss and my friend. But he betrayed me." The director's gaze sharpened. "Betrayed you how?" His throat tightened, his anger flaring. "He slept with my wife. He used his position to manipulate me." The director's pen froze mid-scribble. Her expression softened. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I didn't realize." She cleared her throat. "Did you feel pressured to maintain a personal relationship with him because of his position?" Daniel thought about all those late-night drinks, the dinners, the shared confidences, how Michael had blurred the lines between boss and friend, between trust and betrayal. "Yes," Daniel admitted, his voice raw. "I trusted him. I looked up to him. And he exploited that trust." The director's jaw tightened. "Your testimony is crucial. We're building a case, and your story matters." His chest tightened. He didn't want to be involved. He wanted to move on, to forget Michael existed. But he knew he couldn't run from this, not if he wanted closure. "I'll cooperate," he said, his voice steady. "I'll tell you everything." That night, Daniel sat at the dining table, staring at his untouched dinner. Emily watched him, her face lined with worry. "Are you okay? You've been quiet all night." He looked up, his eyes tired. "They're investigating Michael. HR wants me to testify." Emily's face paled. "What? What are you going to do?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to let it go, to walk away and never look back." He met her gaze, his eyes dark. "But he didn't just betray me. He abused his power. He hurt others. And I can't stay silent about that." Emily's shoulders slumped, guilt flickering across her face. I should have seen it. I thought I was the only one. I didn't realize how manipulative he was. How calculated." Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he got away with it for too long. His voice softened. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about doing what's right." Emily reached across the table, her fingers trembling as they brushed his. "I support you. Whatever you decide, I'm here." For a moment, he hesitated, then covered her hand with his. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a step forward. The day of the hearing arrived, cold and gray. Daniel sat in the waiting room, his heart pounding, his hands clammy. The walls were stark white, the air sterile. He felt like he was suffocating. His phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "I believe in you. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." His chest tightened, a wave of emotion washing over him. He typed back, "Thank you. I couldn't do this without you." Moments later, he was called in. The room was sterile, a long table flanked by company executives. Michael sat at the far end, his face pale, his shoulders hunched. He looked smaller, diminished. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment Daniel saw fear in Michael's eyes. It was a strange sight. Weeks passed after the hearing. Michael's name became a whisper in the halls, his office left untouched, a hollow reminder of what once was. The investigation led to his resignation, his reputation in tatters. It was over. Or so Daniel thought. One evening, as he was leaving the office, a figure stood by his car. The man was haggard, his suit wrinkled, his face pale. Michael. Daniel's muscles tensed, anger bubbling up. "What are you doing here?" Michael's shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. I needed to see you. To explain." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Explain? You used me. You betrayed my trust, destroyed my marriage. And for what? To feel powerful?" Michael winced, his gaze dropping. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt you." Daniel's laugh was cold, bitter. "You didn't mean to? You knew exactly what you were doing." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You manipulated me. You manipulated her. And now you want sympathy?" Michael's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I lost everything, Daniel. My job, my reputation, my family. They won't even look at me." His voice cracked. "I'm ruined." Daniel stared at him, his anger mingling with pity. The man before him wasn't the powerful boss he once feared. He was just broken. "You did this to yourself?" Daniel said, his voice firm. "You made your choices. You can't blame anyone else." Michael's shoulders sagged, defeat washing over him. "I know, I wanted to say I'm sorry." His voice was a whisper, fragile. "For everything." Daniel's chest tightened. The apology hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Part of him wanted to scream, to lash out, to make Michael feel the pain he'd caused. But another part of him felt relief. "I don't forgive you," Daniel said, his voice steady. "But I'm done hating you. I won't carry that weight anymore." Michael's face crumpled, his body shaking with silent sobs. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the night. Daniel stood there, the cool breeze washing over him. For the first time in months, he felt lighter. Life moved on, slowly but surely. Daniel and Emily continued rebuilding their marriage, piece by fragile piece. They went to counseling, confronted the pain, the anger, the resentment. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others. Some nights ended in tears, old wounds reopening, but they kept trying, kept choosing each other. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Emily turned to him, her eyes soft. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" Daniel took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I want to try. I want us to be okay." Her eyes shimmered with hope, her voice trembling. "Me too." They sat in silence, their hands clasped, hearts fragile but healing. Months later, Daniel received a message. "From Michael. I'm leaving town, starting over somewhere new. I just wanted to thank you for not destroying me. I hope you find peace." "I'm sorry." Daniel stared at the words, his chest tight. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The past was behind him, a chapter closed. He looked up at Emily, who was laughing as she folded laundry, a lightness in her eyes he hadn't seen in a long time. His heart swelled, a smile breaking through. They had been through hell, but they were still here, still together, still choosing each other. One evening, they visited the park again. The air was crisp, the leaves golden and red. They sat on the blanket, watching the sunset paint the sky. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Daniel wrapped his arm around her, his lips brushing her hair. "Yeah, we have." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Do you think we can make it?" He met her gaze, his heart steady. "I think we already have." Their fingers intertwined, holding on tight. They watched the sun dip below the horizon, a new chapter beginning. Together. The end. Time became their ally. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, each one a testament to their choice to rebuild. Daniel and Emily's journey wasn't perfect. It was messy, painful, and complicated. But it was real. One evening, they sat in their living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting a golden hue. Emily handed Daniel a worn envelope, her hands trembling. "I found this. I think you should read it." Daniel hesitated before opening it. Inside was a letter, dated months before everything had collapsed. "Dear Daniel, I don't know how to say this. Every time I look at you, the guilt chokes me. I made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it. I was weak. I was lost. And I let myself be manipulated by someone who only wanted to use me. I thought I was in control, but I was wrong. I never meant to hurt you. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of destroying everything we built. You deserve better than this. Better than me. But I can't imagine my life without you. I want to fight for us. If you'll let me. I'm sorry. I love you. I always will. Emily." Daniel's hands shook as he read her words. The ink was smudged in places, tear stains evident. He looked up at her, his vision blurred. "You wrote this before I even knew?" Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I was too much of a coward to give it to you. I thought, maybe if I just buried it, it would go away." She let out a broken laugh. But it didn't. It only got worse. Daniel closed his eyes, the weight of her words sinking in. She had been struggling long before the truth came out. She had been trapped in her own prison of guilt and shame. He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "I wish you had told me sooner." Her voice wavered. "I wish I had been brave enough to." They sat in silence, the letter resting. Between them, a bridge connecting the past and the present. Weeks later, they revisited the counselor. This time, they didn't talk about the affair. They talked about themselves, their fears, their insecurities, their hopes for the future. They laughed, they cried, they healed. One night, as they lay in bed, Emily whispered, "Do you ever regret trying again?" Daniel pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "No, it's been the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's worth it. You're worth it." She buried her face in his chest, her voice muffled. "I don't deserve you." He held her tighter. "We don't deserve each other, but we chose each other, and that's what matters." Months turned into a year. They visited new places, created new memories, filled the empty spaces with laughter and love. The scars remained, but they were no longer wounds. They were reminders of what they had survived. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Emily turned. To him, her eyes shimmering. "Do you think we've made it?" Daniel smiled, his heart full. "We're still here, aren't we?" She laughed, the sound light and free. "Yeah, we are." They sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, their hands intertwined. Together. Epilogue years later, Daniel found the old letter tucked in a book. The words were faded, but the emotions were still vivid. He smiled, his heart warm. "Hey, Em," he called out. "Look what I found." She walked over, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes just as bright. She saw the letter and gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh my God, I forgot about that." Daniel wrapped his arm around her, his voice soft. "I never did." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with love. "Thank you for giving us another chance." He kissed her forehead, his heart full. "Thank you for being worth the fight." They stood together, their past behind them, their future ahead, still choosing each other. The end. Years had passed since the storm that nearly tore them apart. Their children had grown, laughter once again filled their home, and the ghosts of the past were mere whispers, faint echoes that no longer held power over them. Daniel and Emily built a life they were proud of, one defined not by perfection, but by resilience. They had faced the worst and emerged stronger, not despite the pain, but because of it. One evening, they attended a gala organized by Daniel's new firm. He had left, his old job behind, along with the toxic environment and the man who had tried to destroy him. Starting over was terrifying, but it turned out to be the best decision he had ever made. As they mingled with new colleagues and friends, a familiar face appeared. Mark. He looked older, worn down, his arrogance replaced by a hollow, weary gaze. He approached them hesitantly, his shoulders slumped. "Daniel, Emily, I didn't expect to see you here." Daniel's jaw tightened, his old anger flickering to life. But he felt Emily's hand slip into his, her touch grounding him. He took a breath, his voice calm. "Neither did I." Mark looked at the floor, shame coloring his features. "I lost everything. My marriage, my career, everything. I deserved it." He swallowed, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry for everything I did. I was a fool. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know." Daniel watched the man who had once held so much power now standing before him, broken and defeated. He felt a strange mixture of pity and relief. Mark was no longer a threat. He was just a man who made terrible choices. After a long pause, Daniel nodded. "I appreciate the apology, but forgiveness, that's something I did for myself. Long time ago. Mark looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. You did? Daniel glanced at Emily, her eyes filled with compassion. Yeah, I let go of the anger because it was hurting me more than it ever hurt you. I moved on, and I hope you find a way to do the same. Mark's shoulders sagged with a heavy exhale. I don't deserve that, but thank you. Without another word, Mark walked away, his figure blending into the crowd. Emily turned to Daniel, her eyes searching his face. Are you okay? He smiled, his heart light. Yeah, I think I really am. They danced that night, laughing under the glittering lights, their hearts unburdened. Years later, Daniel stood in his study, holding a photograph, one taken during their trip to Italy, where they had renewed their vows under a sunset-streaked sky. He traced his finger over their smiling faces, his heart full. Emily appeared at the door, her hair now completely silver, but her spirit as vibrant as ever. You're getting nostalgic again. He laughed, setting the photo down. I can't help it. We've been through so much, and we're still standing. She leaned against the doorframe, her eyes soft. Do you ever wish we hadn't gone through all of it? Daniel walked over, wrapping his arms around her. I wish the pain hadn't been so deep, but I wouldn't change where we ended up. It made us who we are. Emily rested her head against his chest, her voice a whisper. I'm grateful for your forgiveness, for everything. He kissed her forehead, his heart overflowing. And I'm grateful that you never gave up on us. They stood there, swaying gently to a silent rhythm, their love stronger, deeper, unbreakable, because they had chosen each other. Every day, the end. As the years continued to pass, Daniel and Emily became pillars of wisdom and strength within their community. Friends and family often came to them for advice, drawn to the quiet resilience they radiated. They never spoke of the darkest chapter, of their marriage in detail, but they never hid it either. It was a part of their story, one that had shaped them into who they were. One day, their eldest daughter, Sarah, came to visit with her fiancé. They gathered in the living room, laughter echoing off the walls as old stories were shared. Yet as the evening wore on, Sarah's laughter grew strained, her smile faltering. Daniel noticed, his fatherly instincts kicking in. Later that evening, as Emily cleaned up the kitchen, Daniel found Sarah sitting on the porch, staring at the stars with a worried expression. He sat beside her, the wooden swing creaking under their weight. Something on your mind, sweetheart? Sarah sighed, her shoulders slumping. Dad, how did you know you could trust Mom again? Daniel's heart skipped a beat, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this question, not from his daughter, not now. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. That's a complicated answer. She looked down, her fingers nervously twisting her ring. Matt and we've been having issues. He lied about something big, and I don't know how to get past it. I love him, but I don't know if I can trust him again. Daniel's chest tightened. He could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had once carried. Trust isn't something you get back overnight. It's rebuilt one moment at a time, through actions, not words. Sarah looked at him, her eyes shimmering. But how did you get past the pain? He leaned back, the memories washing over him. The betrayal, the anger, the nights spent questioning everything. I didn't, at least not at first. It hurt like hell, but I realized that holding on to the pain was hurting me more than anyone else. So I chose to forgive, not just for her, but for me. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. How did you know it was the right choice? Daniel's gaze softened, his heart aching for his daughter. I didn't. But I knew I still loved her. I knew I wanted to fight for us. And every day, we chose each other, again and again. That's what saved us. She was silent for a moment, her eyes searching the night sky. I don't know if I can do that. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle. Then don't decide right now. Take it one day at a time. See if his actions show you the man he truly is. And if you decide to forgive, then forgive. Fully. Don't carry the past into the future. Sarah leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. You're stronger than I thought, Dad. He chuckled softly. I didn't feel strong at the time. But looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. It made us who we are. They sat there in comfortable silence, the stars twinkling above. Eventually, Sarah whispered, Thanks, Dad, for being honest with me. He kissed the top of her head. Anytime, sweetheart. Just remember, whatever you decide, we're here for you. That night, Daniel shared the conversation with Emily. She listened quietly, her eyes glistening with tears. She's just like you, strong, stubborn, and brave. He smiled, his heart full. She's more like you than she realizes. She loves deeply, and she fights for the people she cares about. Emily wrapped her arms around him, her voice trembling. I'm grateful that you fought for us. He held her close, his voice steady. We fought for each other. And I'd do it all over again. As they lay in bed, their fingers intertwined, Daniel realized that their story hadn't just been about survival. It had been about growth, love, and the courage to face the truth. They were more than just husband and wife. They were partners, survivors, and dreamers. And together they would continue to write the rest of their story, one day at a time, because they had chosen each other. And they always would. The end. Years flowed by, marked by birthdays, anniversaries, and countless quiet evenings spent in each other's company. Daniel and Emily watched their children grow, celebrated their successes, and held them close during their failures. They witnessed graduations, promotions, and eventually, weddings. The day Sarah married Matt was filled with laughter and tears, a bittersweet echo of Daniel and Emily's own journey. As they watched their daughter exchange vows, Daniel's heart swelled with pride. He knew the struggles Sarah and Matt had faced, the hard conversations, the tears, the forgiveness they had fought to earn. After the ceremony, during the father-daughter dance, Sarah leaned in, whispering, I took your advice, Dad, one day at a time. You were right. Daniel's throat tightened, his eyes misting. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. You're braver than you know. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. I learned from the best. Later that night, Daniel and Emily swayed together under the stars, the music wrapping around them like a warm embrace. He looked into her eyes, still seeing the woman he fell in love with all those years ago, and whispered, We did good, didn't we? Emily's gaze softened, her fingers tracing his jawline. Yeah, we did. Despite everything, we built something beautiful. He kissed her, a slow, lingering promise. Thank you. For fighting with me. For choosing me. Every day. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'll always choose you, Daniel. Always. They danced in silence, the world fading away, leaving just the two of them. Two souls who had been broken, rebuilt, and forever intertwined. Years later, Daniel sat by Emily's hospital bed, his hands wrapped around hers. Her once vibrant eyes were tired, her silver hair framing a face etched with a lifetime of laughter and love. She looked at him, her smile weak but genuine. I'm not afraid, Daniel, because I've already lived my dreams. With you. His heart shattered, tears streaming down his face. I don't know how to do this without you. She squeezed his hand, her voice soft. You'll find a way, just like you always have, and I'll always be with you, right here. She placed his hand over his heart, her touch trembling. Our love, it's forever. Daniel buried his face in her shoulder, his body racked with silent sobs. I love you, Emily. I always will. She closed her eyes, her breath slowing. I love you too. My forever choice. And then, with a final, contented sigh, she was gone. A year later, Daniel stood at her grave, the wind whispering through the trees. He traced his fingers over her name, the woman who had been his life, his heart, his everything. In his hand, he held a letter, worn and creased from the countless times he had read it. Emily's last words to him, written in her delicate handwriting. My dearest Daniel, thank you for choosing me, even when it was hard. Thank you for forgiving me, even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for loving me, even when I was broken. I hope you find peace in the memories we created, in the life we built together. I hope you continue to live, to laugh, to love, even when I'm gone. Because my love, I'll always be with you, forever and always. Your Emily. Daniel wiped away his tears, his heart aching but full. He stood tall, his voice breaking as he whispered, I'll keep living. For you. He walked away, the wind carrying his words, his promise. Because love didn't end in death. It continued, living in the spaces between breaths, in the memories that refused to fade, and as long as he remembered her, she would never truly be gone. The end. Virile years had passed since Emily's death, and Daniel had learned to live with the echo of her absence. The house they had shared, once bustling with the laughter of children and the warmth of shared moments, now felt quieter. He had retired. Early, his life slowed down by time and memory. But despite the loneliness, there was peace. One autumn evening, Daniel found himself sitting in his favorite armchair, the one that had once been shared with Emily as they sipped tea and talked about their day. Now it was just him and the shadows of the past that lingered in the corners of the room. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. It was a message from Sarah. Dad, we're coming over for dinner tonight. We've been thinking of you. I miss you. Daniel smiled, his heart warmed by the thought of his daughter. He hadn't seen her in a few days, and although their lives had grown busy with families of their own, the bond between them remained unbreakable. He quickly set about preparing the dinner, more out of habit than necessity. Sarah and her family often stopped by, and the routines of family life were a comfort, even in his solitude. As he chopped vegetables and stirred the pot on the stove, his mind wandered to Emily. He often wondered if she could see him now, if she was watching over him, as she had promised in her final days. In some ways, it felt like she was still there. The love they had built, the resilience they had fostered, was alive in their children, in the stories they told and the memories they shared. That evening, Sarah and Matt arrived with their 2 children in tow. The house filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of the meal Daniel had prepared. It was a reminder that life, though fleeting, continued to move forward, just as it always had. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room. Sarah looked at her father, her eyes full of gratitude. Dad, you've been so strong through everything. I don't think you ever fully realized what you did for all of us. Daniel raised an eyebrow, surprised. What do you mean? She smiled softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You showed us what true love and forgiveness really are. Not the fairy tale kind, but the kind that's messy and real and requires work. You taught me how to love, how to forgive, how to choose. His heart swelled with emotion. I don't know if I did it right, sweetheart, but I did the best I could. We all did. Matt, now a part of the family for many years, nodded in agreement. You gave us a blueprint. I'm grateful for that, Dan. Daniel's eyes misted as he gazed at the family around him. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I never regretted fighting for you, fighting for us. Sarah reached out, squeezing his hand. We fought too, Dad. We're just as much a part of this story as you are. As the evening came to a close, Daniel sat on the porch, staring up at the stars. The memories of Emily still lingered in the air, but they no longer weighed on him. He had come to realize that life wasn't about holding on to the past, no matter how painful or beautiful it had been. It was about learning to live fully in the present, with an open heart, even after loss. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment he could almost hear Emily's voice. Not in words, but in the quiet peace that surrounded him. He was at peace, with the past, with the mistakes, with the love, and with the forgiveness. It had taken time. It had taken courage. And above all, it had taken a willingness to choose, and in the end, that was all anyone could do. The end. The seasons continued to change, and life, like the flowing river, moved steadily forward. Daniel found himself waking each morning with a sense of purpose, no longer burdened by the weight of the past, but fueled by the love and lessons that had shaped his journey. The empty spaces that once seemed vast and suffocating now felt like quiet corners of his heart, where the memories of Emily resided like old photographs, reminders of a time that, while gone, was never truly lost. He had become a grandfather, and as he watched his grandchildren run around his yard, laughter filling the air, he couldn't help but marvel at the circle of life that seemed to unfold in the most unexpected ways. Sarah and Matt had built a family full of love, just as he and Emily had. And in their eyes, Daniel saw not just their mother's spirit, but his own, a legacy passed down through generations. One afternoon, Daniel sat with his granddaughter, Lily, as she carefully painted a picture of a sunset. I don't know if I can make it look right, Grandpa, she said, frowning in concentration. He smiled, leaning over to look at her painting. You're doing just fine, sweetie. Art doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to come from the heart. She looked up at him, her brow furrowed. Like you did when you forgave Grandma? Daniel blinked, taken aback by the question. It had been years since they had talked about that difficult time in their lives, but Lily's innocence, her untainted perspective, made him realize something. Yes, exactly like that. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about choosing to heal, for yourself and for those you love. Lily paused, then smiled. I think I get it. So it's like your heart makes space for good things, even when it's hurt? His heart swelled with pride. Yes, that's exactly it. As the years wore on, Daniel found peace in his routine. In the small things that once felt insignificant, but now held so much meaning. He continued to visit Emily's grave, sometimes bringing flowers, sometimes just sitting in silence, feeling the presence of her love surrounding him. And each time, he left a little piece of his heart there, forever intertwined with hers. But even as he held on to those precious memories, Daniel never stopped growing. He traveled to places he'd always dreamed of visiting, took up painting. In his later years, and even started writing a journal of his life, a story for his children and grandchildren to remember. It was in the pages of that journal that Daniel reflected most deeply. He wrote about the love he shared with Emily, the pain of her betrayal, the long road to forgiveness, and the lessons that had shaped him. His writing was raw, unflinching in its honesty, yet tender in its vulnerability. It wasn't just his story. It was the story of anyone who had ever faced loss, love, betrayal, and the courage to forgive. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel sat in the park watching the leaves fall. He was 72 now, but his mind and spirit remained sharp. He sat on the same bench where he had once waited for Emily after a long day of work, his thoughts drifting back to those days when their love had been simple, uncomplicated. But life had a way of challenging those simple moments, didn't it? Life wasn't just the love you shared during the happy times. It was the struggle, the forgiveness, and the lessons learned from the hardest of days. A voice broke his reverie. "Grandpa Daniel?" He turned and saw Lily standing there, her arms full of books. She had grown into a young woman, poised and confident, her heart full of the wisdom he had passed on. "I thought I'd find you here," she said, sitting beside him. "Mom says you've been working on your story. Can I read it someday?" Daniel smiled. "I hope you will. It's for all of you, the family. It's a story of love, forgiveness, and the beauty of second chances." Lily leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think I already know the story, but it would be nice to read it all written out, so I can remember it forever." Daniel's heart felt light, his soul content. "You're right, my dear. It's a story worth remembering." And so, as the years unfolded and his days grew shorter, Daniel knew that the story of his life, of Emily, and of the love they had shared was far from over. It lived on in his children, in his grandchildren, in the lessons they carried forward, because love, true love, didn't end. It never truly ended. It simply grew, evolved, and lived on forever. The end. Years passed, and with each new chapter of his life, Daniel grew more aware of the fleeting nature of time. His children were grown, and his grandchildren had begun to carve their own paths in the world. Yet despite the changes, the old house, now quieter with each passing season, remained a sanctuary of memories. One late afternoon, as Daniel was tending to his garden, a visitor arrived at the door. It was an unexpected knock, one that jolted him from his routine. When he opened the door, he found an unfamiliar face, a man in his late 40s dressed in a tailored suit. "Mr. Daniel Hudson?" the man asked, his voice measured but somewhat hesitant. Daniel studied the man for a moment before nodding. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Nathan Roberts. I believe we have some mutual connections," the man continued. I'm an old friend of your late wife, Emily." The words caught Daniel off guard. He had assumed Emily's past was a closed chapter, sealed away in the pages of time, forgotten by all but those closest to her. Yet here was someone new, someone who claimed to have known her long ago. Daniel stepped aside, allowing Nathan into the house. "Please, come in. You're a friend of Emily's? I didn't know she had any old friends left." Nathan gave a quiet nod as he sat down. His eyes seemed distant, lost in thought for a moment before he spoke again. "We were close, back when we were both young, before I lost touch with her." Daniel's curiosity piqued, but there was something else too. A subtle tension in the air that made the conversation feel more like a mystery than a reunion. "What brings you here after all this time?" Nathan hesitated, his fingers lightly tapping on the armrest of the chair. "There are things I never told her, things I should have said before she passed. I owe her that." Daniel studied him carefully, wondering what secrets this man held about his late wife. "Secrets?" Nathan nodded. "It's not just about the past, Mr. Hudson. I wanted you to know something about the day she passed." The air between them grew heavier, and Daniel, sensing that the conversation was about to take a deeper turn, leaned forward. "What do you mean? What are you trying to tell me?" Nathan's voice was steady, but there was a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. There's something about Emily's death, something that never sat right with me. I wasn't just a friend, Daniel. I was there when things fell apart for her, and there are pieces of the story that you still don't. No, Daniel's pulse quickened. Pieces of the story? The words felt like a thread unraveling in a tapestry that had taken years to piece together. Could there really be more to the story of Emily's life? Of their life together? Nathan continued, his tone more somber. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just feel that you deserve to know the truth. You see, after the affair with your boss, things went much deeper than you ever realized. Emily tried to leave, tried to run, from the life she had built with you. Daniel's chest tightened. His thoughts flashed back to the betrayal, the moment he learned of Emily's affair with his boss, and the many years that followed where he tried to rebuild their life together. Could it be that everything he had worked so hard to forgive had been part of a larger web of deceit? She told you it was a mistake, Nathan said quietly. But it was more than that. Emily, she was running from a much darker truth. A truth that wasn't just about love or infidelity. Daniel's mind raced as he absorbed Nathan's words, the pieces of the puzzle shifting and clicking into place. What truth? Nathan sighed, a deep, almost painful sound. Emily was afraid, Daniel. Afraid of you, of your love. She knew that you were trying to forgive her, but she didn't know if she could forgive herself. There was another reason she was so distant in the end. She was trying to protect you from something, from what happened before the affair. Daniel stood, pacing slowly, the room spinning with the weight of Nathan's confession. You're saying there's more to the story? Something I didn't know about? Nathan stood as well, his gaze unwavering. Yes, I should have told you sooner. Emily was deeply troubled by what had happened with your boss, yes, but also by a secret she never shared with you, a secret she thought would destroy everything. The room felt colder now, the shadows of the evening creeping in as Nathan finally spoke the truth that had been buried for so long. Emily was involved in something years before you met her, something she thought she could leave behind. When she came back to town, she realized it was catching up with her. She wasn't just trying to protect herself. She was trying to protect you too. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick with unspoken tension. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he asked, "What was it? What was she protecting me from?" Nathan's face softened, and for the first time. It had been several months since Nathan Roberts' visit, and while the details of Emily's past were now known to Daniel, the landscape of his life had irrevocably changed. Yet, in the quiet aftershocks of the truth, he found himself beginning to reconcile the pieces of a story that had once seemed impossible to understand. Though the past had been shrouded in secrecy, Daniel felt lighter now, as if the weight of decades-old questions had finally been answered. But, as he moved forward, life presented him with unexpected challenges, even in this new chapter of peace. One rainy afternoon, Daniel was at his office, sitting in front of a stack of papers. But his mind was elsewhere. He had managed to build a reputation as a man who had weathered the storms of life with quiet strength. Yet, even the most seasoned of souls find themselves confronted by new crossroads, and for Daniel, this one arrived in the form of an old letter. It was from his daughter Lydia, whose voice over the phone had grown increasingly distant in recent years. The letter was thick with emotion, more so than he had anticipated. The words on the page were stark and raw. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Mom. I never wanted to burden you with this, but I think you should know the truth, too." The letter continued, speaking of Lydia's own suspicions about Emily's past, a secret she had uncovered in recent years after her mother's passing. It was a secret Lydia had struggled to process, one that had been sealed away, too painful to share with Daniel at the time. Yet now, years after Emily's death, Lydia had come to terms with the truth. Emily's involvement in dangerous dealings had, in fact, extended far beyond what Nathan had ever revealed. Lydia had discovered financial transactions, coded messages, and photographs that pointed to a much deeper involvement, one that had nearly destroyed their family. But it wasn't just Emily's actions that Lydia uncovered. It was also the collateral damage of those actions, which reached far beyond the grave. Daniel sat back in his chair, the letter trembling in his hands. The truth, it seemed, would never fully be buried. As the rain pattered against the window, he felt the pull of an old, familiar pain, a reminder that no matter how much time passed, the past could never truly be outrun. But then, a thought occurred to him. If he had forgiven Emily once, could he find it in his heart to forgive again? To understand the deeper complexity of her choices and the ones his daughter had just uncovered? The truth was not a static thing, but something that evolved over time, revealing new layers when you least expected it. Daniel knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that reconciling his past with his present would take patience. But he had already faced betrayal and heartache. He had survived. As his phone buzzed with a message from Lydia, asking for a conversation. In person, Daniel knew what he needed to do. Weeks later, Daniel sat across from his daughter in the same old diner where they used to meet after school. Lydia's face had changed, matured, as if the weight of the years had pressed harder on her shoulders than they had on his own. But even in that, there was a bond, a shared understanding. "I never wanted to hurt you, Dad," Lydia said, her voice quieter than he remembered, but no less resolute. "I didn't know how to tell you what I found, and I didn't want to drag up old ghosts." Daniel reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. "You don't need to apologize. I think I've come to understand that the truth, however painful, is something we all have to face in our own time." Lydia's eyes filled with tears, but she managed a soft smile. "I know. It's just, I thought maybe if we didn't talk about it, maybe it would just go away." Daniel sighed, his voice gentle. "The truth doesn't go away, honey. It only grows like a vine that takes root. You can't ignore it forever. But I think, now that we both know what happened, maybe it's time we find a way to live with it." Lydia looked up, searching his face as if looking for something she hadn't been sure of until now. "Do you still love her, Dad? Even after all of this?" Daniel thought for a long moment, the weight of the question hanging in the air. "I don't. Think love is as simple as we want it to be. It's not just about the good things, or the things that go right. It's about what you choose to do after everything goes wrong." His voice softened. "I loved her, Lydia. I still do, in a way. But the love I have now is different. It's not about what happened, but about what we can build from it." Lydia nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I want to believe that too, Dad. I want to believe that we can be okay after everything." Daniel gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "We will be. We have to be. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all, that healing doesn't happen overnight.